Thank you very much indeed. It's a great privilege to be here this evening at the Frontline Club. And I'm glad that you've all had an opportunity to watch this remarkable film. We're joined this evening by the film's director, Franz Böhm. We're also joined by Glacia Kwong at the end there, who is a doctoral student and activist, strong activist in the Hong Kong movement. Also Catherine Lee, who's a performer and activist within the movement too. My name is Luke de Paulford. I am, as it says there, the director of Arise, which is an anti-slavery charity, but I'm also the founder of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China and do some work with various other organizations, including Hong Kong Watch. So it's a privilege to be with you this evening, and it's a privilege to moderate this discussion after this remarkable film. I think what we will do is have a discussion between the three of us and then open out to questions from the audience. Should be about half an hour. Let's see how it goes. But I want to begin by asking both Glacia and Catherine, do you believe that this film is a faithful representation of your experience of protest through the Hong Kong movement and beyond? I might start, if it's okay with you, Catherine, if you can just give us a reflection. What were your reflections on the film, and do you think that it faithfully expresses your experience?
Well, to be very honest, that when the movement happened, I most of the time spent time in the UK. However, I did spend some time in Hong Kong, and I was on the street. And I would say that the film can actually authentically capture the moments when you were on the street. And I would say it's fairly difficult to capture all these gas and all the violent actions that were on the street. However, they did, from a frontline perspective, capture them like very nicely. And I think it's very authentic, and I think it's very, I like how they can essentially capture the moments on the street at the same time, the feelings of the frontline protesters, because sometimes it's very hard to actually know what they think and what they feel and their allies on the streets while it happened, and all the aftermath feelings that they are having, and that it's a very difficult situation to capture, and these moments are actually very heartfelt. So I think it's very righteously captured them.
Writing on what Catherine have said, I just have one thing to add. I think it's like, as Catherine said, there are a lot of heartfelt moments, like the struggle of what Pepper was saying in the monologue. Like, she felt like all hopes were lost, and all of these things and all the things that happened were for nothing. I think this part, I kind of share the same despair to a certain extent, where I do have the moments where I was just feeling I'm not sure what I'm doing, and feels like that there's nothing left to be done. Like that, those feelings were true, but at the same time, as an activist, you know that it's not entirely true at the same time, because things are still happening in Hong Kong, even though it doesn't get as much attention as before. For example, Chow Hung Tong or Gwyneth Ho or a lot of other activists, they're still fighting in the courtroom setting. They're still saying things that should be said. For example, I'm not going to give up the freedom of the press in exchange for bail conditions. This is what Chow Hung Tong and Gwyneth Ho are like continuously doing in Hong Kong. And so there is a very delicate feeling of, I'm not sure if that's like 100% representing how, at least for me personally, how I am feeling, because at the same time I share that despair, but I also share that kind of determination that something more has to be done. There's still room to facilitate meaningful changes in Hong Kong, either inside or outside of Hong Kong.
Thanks, Lisa. Can we stay with that a second? Because I think this is very interesting. I mean, probably everybody on this panel knows people who are in prison because of their activism in Hong Kong. I certainly know that the three of us do, and I wouldn't be surprised, Franz, if through your work, you'd also had the same experience. And you said, Glacia, things have changed. You know, the movement isn't as expressive, isn't as loud, isn't as visible as it was back in 2019. And some of the people in the room here won't be seeing it in the news and will be thinking, hey, what's happened? Is this thing done? Can you describe how that activism continues, how it still lives, how it's changed? With you, Glacia, first, if I may.
From a very general perspective, the movement in 2019 have three very visible, clear elements. The first one is the protest on the streets. That was what was being mainly featured in the film. And there is the international advocacy work, and there is the electoral approach, which was the primary election in 2020 that was held among the pan-democratic camps. So these three elements were the most visible and most reported things in the movement. But after the Beijing regime has introduced the national security law in Hong Kong, bypassing the city's legislature, these three elements became much less visible, even nearly impossible. For example, any protest on the streets will be seen as local terrorism. International advocacy is basically colluding with foreign forces, and the electoral campaigns and stuff have been seen as subversion of the state because the 47 candidates of the primary will shouldn't be trialed in court. And so we are basically back to square one into that process of figuring out what's going to work and what's not going to work. Because how did the movement came in 2019 out of a trial and error process? We tried different things in the past or during the movement, and we kind of like in a very leaderless form develop these kind of three approaches. So we're basically back to square and trying to figure out what works. For example, like there are filmmakers like France, but they're still in Hong Kong. They're trying to make films. And repeatedly, there are films being banned in Hong Kong from screening, but they are still trying to do things, and journalists are still trying to do that job. So there are a lot of these things that are happening, but they're not like reported by foreign media, and the international community are not informed well enough about what is happening underground. So I'd say in general sense, this is what is happening underground right now.
Thanks. Do you have anything to add to that, Catherine?
Yeah, so I would say for the past years, before the NSL was actually implemented, people have been using other than fighting on the streets, we have been using alternative ways, not only on the ground in Hong Kong, but also like foreign lobbying and also different types of creative ways to actually protest. For example, like you see all these amazing artworks and also music work that is not only in Hong Kong, but it's also, people are also trying to spread it across the globe by hosting exhibitions and using culture to preserve this type of what happened in Hong Kong, all this history. And also even after the NSL was implemented, so there are lots of different Hong Kong diaspora communities in different parts of the world. And these Hong Kongers, they don't just give up. Just like I do get that what happened in Hong Kong, just like what Glacier just said, it's very easy for people to feel like I need to give up because I feel like what we did is nothing. NSL still got implemented, and it seems like we've lost the battle. However, I think since lots of Hong Kong diaspora communities are all around the world, and they are still trying their best to promote and raise awareness about the identity of Hong Kongers and what happened, and educate people about the difference of China and Hong Kong, and being essentially just ambassadors of Hong Kong. And these are some essentially softer ways to actually continue the movement in our daily lives, which we can observe in tiny bits in our everyday life. So I would say that it's continued, but in subtle ways, not in ways that you can always see in news or media.
So when I hear those words, collusion with foreign forces, it used to make me laugh. I mean, when they passed the NSL, the National Security Law in Hong Kong, those of us hearing these words thought, this is crazy. Now it actually makes me feel sick because I know people who are in prison because of collusion with foreign forces, and some of those forces would include people who are in this room, and including myself. I was pulled in by the Foreign Office and told that because I was named in a national security law case quite extensively, that I was vulnerable to extradition to China from 60 countries. And it gives you some indication of the breadth of intimidation and influence that the Chinese Communist Party and its outpost in the HKSAR has. So on that point, Franz, can you tell us, when you were filming this, what sort of resistance did you encounter from what you saw as party or CCP authorities? And how did you deal with that?
Sure, yeah. Before answering the question, I just want to underscore one more time that this whole project was only possible because of an amazing international teamwork, and everything that you saw was made by people in their 20s and was also made by or motivated by an incredible braveness displayed by every single team member. And yeah, I think that's a very, very interesting topic. The most challenging part of this whole project was not even filming in Hong Kong or in Chile. It wasn't filming while being shot at, but it was defending the project after the completion of filming. We received massive threats, death threats. Even my grandparents received stuff, you know, even my grandparents received threats in their mailbox. And we collaborated very, very closely with the Harvard University and with numerous departments of the Harvard University to build up an international infrastructure that is allowing filmmakers like myself and like many others to make these projects in the first place. We were actually quite surprised that when we started the project, we obviously knew about the challenge. We knew that when we include a Hong Kong activist, that we will face some sort of resistance there. And we were quite surprised that there was not a clear strategy for projects like these. We spoke with many other filmmakers, young filmmakers, and the most used strategy was just to cancel these projects or just not to make them at all. And clearly that, you know, that situation needed a solution. And we are, again, very, very happy that we had a close collaboration. The so-called reverse deepfake technology was developed at Harvard. It enabled us to securely do the film in Hong Kong and to protect not only Pepper's identity, but also the identity of, for example, the mappers that you saw in the film and everybody else in Hong Kong.
Can I just ask you to explain that reverse deepfake technology for those who don't know?
Yeah, perhaps some of you know the deepfake technology that is basically, you know, creating an image of, I don't know, Trump or whatsoever from nothing. And the reverse deepfake technology essentially is when you already have an image, let's say you capture someone at the front line who is in theory doing something illegal, then you can use the so-called reverse deepfake technology to in a very minimalistic way adjust the images a little bit frame by frame, meaning that no facial recognition software can do anything with that material. That also means that not only for this film itself, not only the finished film itself is useless for anyone who wants to capture Pepper or anybody else, but for us, the most important question was when we film in Hong Kong at the front line, we are a potential danger for activists, especially frontier activists. How can we get the material from Hong Kong back to London in a safe way? And neither uploading it to any sort of cloud nor transporting it via plane is 100% safe. And we were happy that, you know, these Harvard IT students enabled us to do sort of a third opportunity, which is making the material useless before even sending it anywhere. That enabled us to do this project.
Wow. It's actually quite interesting to hear because the sophistication of that compared to what was offered by the Foreign Office when we requested help, which was turn on your two-factor authentication, is quite stark.
That is actually a thing, to be honest.
Okay.
That's a thing.
So I want to focus on the suppression of the arts, and you mentioned this, Glacier. You know, Hong Kong is not a place anymore, unfortunately, where artists can freely express themselves either through film or any other medium. So I wanted to try to press you both, you know, particularly you, Catherine, given that you are a performer and that you're engaged in the arts yourself. Can you talk a bit about the importance of the arts to preserve not just Hong Kong culture in a situation of severe repression back home, but also the longevity of the movement and how important it is for people here to do whatever they can to try to nurture the arts and Hong Kong artists in the diaspora?
I would say, to begin with, there is to talk about how important arts and music is, like for the movement. So when the movement first started, we all knew that there was an emblem, an anthem of Hong Kong that arose, which was written and performed by anonymous Hong Kongers, and it is called Glory to Hong Kong, and it has become a widely recognized anthem for a lot of us, and we recognize it as our national anthem. And I think whenever, just take this as an example, whenever we sing this, whenever we hear this song, you will easily feel a sense of unity, and you will remember our collective identity as Hong Kongers, what we went through together, and especially to the memories of what happened, to the experience we had before, during, and after this movement. So from just merely this example, we can see how important music could be to the movement. And also throughout the movement, we see a lot of local anonymous artists emerging. Basically, there are lots of ironic political comics, memes, and different social media pages that actually help spread what happened in Hong Kong via arts. And sometimes, I don't know if you pay attention to how different people that are non-Hong Kongers would comment on Hong Kongers' arts and creative forms, but even sometimes people in mainland China would compliment like youngsters in Hong Kong. Why would they use such creative ways to actually to create the artworks of the movement? They would actually post it on their online forums or their online websites to say, why are these teens so talented? How could they incorporate these skills to the movement? Just like how in the movie, there was one part that there were mappers. Like, they are just, different people are just using their skills to play their parts, even like be it cultural, artistic, or whatever, that they can use to be in the movement, to bring the best of it. And sometimes while arts and culture and music, they can travel because they are universal language. And even though you don't understand the language, you don't understand Cantonese, or you don't read any traditional Chinese characters, you can understand the beauty of it. You can feel by looking at the arts, listening to the music, you can feel the atmosphere, you can feel the vibe. And that's why like there are people doing overseas exhibition, and I don't see many people doing like concerts yet, but I'm sure there will be, and shows. And then you publish music online, or you cover songs, such as earlier, even before 2019, there is like the song people translated, Do You Hear the People Sing, to a Hong Kongese version. And so that would also be something that is a great example to show how these movement history, or what we encountered, what we went through, can actually be recorded in these creative forms. And it is very essential, as it's kind of soft power that can touch people's minds and make people feel empathetic. And I will understand you if I listen to that, or watch that, or read that piece of work.
Thanks, Catherine. Thank you so much. So Glacier, I think one of the problems that we face at the moment in the UK is that there's, certainly in the political scene, there's a lot of fatigue. It's very difficult to continue to raise the issue of Hong Kong. It's very difficult to get parliamentarians to keep fighting away. There's not much political will. I know that you're engaged a lot in international advocacy for your cause, and you do that all over the place, and you do it exceptionally well. What are your hopes, and what is your reading of the prospects for the Hong Kong movement in the international scene now? How do you feel about it? Do you feel hopeful, or do you feel despairing?
That's a big question. And for the prospect, basically, I don't have a fortune-telling crystal ball in my hand, so I don't have a concrete answer for that. But in general, I'd say, especially in the UK, as one of the contracting parties of the Joint Declaration, the United Kingdom actually has the responsibility, and even not just a moral obligation, but also in terms of international law, to hold China accountable as for its ongoing breach of the Joint Declaration, as the government have already kind of put it, like it's an ongoing breach. And to be honest, the BMO scheme, like the visa scheme, it is helping a lot of Hong Kongers and helping a lot of people who need a safe passage to a safe place. That is indeed a good thing. But that doesn't answer to UK's responsibility under the Joint Declaration and under which the Vienna Convention as well, because the Joint Declaration is an international treaty that's verified and ratified under the Vienna Convention under international law. So there has to be mechanisms to hold China accountable. And the UK, as basically as the contracting party, has the responsibility to enact those mechanisms to do that. At the same time, I think simply as a democratic country that upholds human rights and fundamental values that we all share, the world has a responsibility to hold China accountable as well. For example, when it comes to trade, for example, I'm based in Europe, and there is a huge tendency when people address the China to say, oh, we basically need the Chinese market, so there's nothing else we can do, we need it. But the thing is, trade happens between two parties. It's not like basically I'm bullying you to get things out of you. It's not like that. Like the Chinese market in general also needs services and products from Europe. And there are times where the European Union was able to incorporate human rights terms when it comes to concluding trade deals. But that never actually happened when the European Union and China is talking about the CAI, the comprehensive investment agreement. So that is something that makes me quite frustrated, that these things should be done, but they're never actually the momentum putting into it. And at the same time, like writing on what Catherine have said, I think it's been very apparent that making art, like surviving as a Hong Konger in general, it's already a political action. Things that weren't political at all become very, very political. Like making pop songs, like there are a few rap songs in Hong Kong that are made by very young artists. They didn't actually explain if it's about the trend of immigration outside of Hong Kong or it's about losing the fundamental values. I'm referring to the pop song made by Si Dong Zhan, which is the two songs. One song is called if you drop something, don't find it. And the other one is yes, it's called I'm leaving, like so long farewell, something like that. And it's like the most like funny and ridiculous lyrics that has nothing to do with like politics, but in general people have that interpretation of that. And that song received quite a lot of criticism from the pro-Beijing camp, saying these are inappropriate in a way. So I would say, like you also asked about what the foreign community, I think supporting these non-political actions in your daily life might be very helpful. Like there are a lot of organizations that are offering help to those who have newly moved into the UK. Like you can always at least maybe bring a cookie for your neighbors if you know that they're Hong Kongers, or if they're not Hong Kongers, you can still do that anyways. And volunteering for these organizations or join the events and get to know more of us. And I think because there'll always be adjustments to be made when there are new people moving into the community, and engaging with them will always like make that process smoother and easier. So these are the things that as individuals we can all do, and or simply greet everyone when we see our neighbors. In a way, I think that that's not something that I do often, but maybe we should all start trying to do that.
Ambassadors.
Yeah, play nice and stuff. So I think these are the things like on a political level and an individual level we can all do. And also express your concerns to your local representatives, because if you have the ability to make a change or make an impact, you should always exhaust all means to facilitate meaningful changes.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think just before opening out to the audience for some questions, Franz, I got a bit of a difficult question to ask you, because I know that this film is obviously much broader than just Hong Kong, but you're a young filmmaker and you're learning the ropes in doing this as well. And you're also going into the very thorny and difficult area of political filmmaking, really. If you had to make this film again, what do you think you'd do differently?
So when we first started researching for the project, we have been in touch with 11 different protest movements across the globe and spoke to many, many people on the ground. And obviously every single movement deserves to have their voices and their stories heard. With this project, we were able to dive in a little bit in these three specific movements. At that time, when we were still in research phase, we were also in touch with many other young filmmakers. And we were always hoping that we can get, some sort of film team, some sort of film project for every single movement. In retrospective now, I think that didn't work as we thought it might work. hugely underestimated the power of fear, I would say. We hugely underestimated what that will do to our family members, to our crew members, and it certainly also prevented many other projects from being made in the first place. That's, I think, one of the biggest challenges we as young filmmakers have to face in the coming years. And yeah, if I would do this project again, this would be sort of my first topic where I would think again how we could position ourselves in a better way. I think I told you earlier that we, for example, had a very long exchange with the German Foreign Office and the German Defense Ministry, and we were always hoping that they will be the ones who create this infrastructure, this international infrastructure with us. And we were disappointed to learn when they, denied at the end, and then we very quickly had to collaborate with Harvard. Obviously, if we would have made that call earlier, that would have saved us 5 months, and certainly with these 5 months, also some projects along the way.
But you wouldn't advise young filmmakers to be fearful. You'd advise them to be courageous, but to be prepared. I mean, what would be the advice?
Difficult. I mean, first of all, who am I? I mean, I'm 22 years old. I'm not in no position to tell anyone any advice. But I think fear is we always saw it as a very irrational emotion. We always had a lot of respect when filming at the front line, respect when obviously handling these incredibly impactful stories. What I would advise young filmmakers to do definitely is that the collaboration with local activists on the ground, with local other journalists and filmmakers and NGOs, is quite a new thing for many filmmakers. Many filmmakers, film their stories and then sort of have the material and they do it on their own. And we always thought that it's a good idea to involve as many activists, the protagonists themselves, in the best way we can. And when we told this to other young filmmakers, we often got many surprised reactions. And I think that's something that we can just do more of that. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, well, opening out to the floor, does anybody have a question? We've got one here, one there. So I'll go to you first, if I may, just there. If we can get a microphone over to the lady there in the beige coat.
Hi, yeah, really enjoyed the film. I was just wondering how you settled on these 3 kind of places and activists. In the end, you said you started with 11. Did you always know that you wanted to focus on Hong Kong, for example, or how did you end up settling on these 3?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, very good question. Thank you. So we have been in touch with 11 different protest movements. And while speaking with them, we also spoke with other young filmmakers. And as I mentioned, we were trying to find a good team and a good project for every movement. And there were some movements, for example, we had one in Russia where it was pretty clear that there were other teams which were in a way better position to do this project than we are. And when we decided for 3 movements based on the criteria that they need a clear democratic majority behind their core goals, behind their core interests, we also wanted to feature 3 movements which are quite different from each other, not only from a geographical standpoint, but also from the development within the society when it comes to protests specifically. I think, for example, that's quite interesting that Hilda in Uganda is one of the first real climate activists there in Uganda, and that in comparison to Chile, for example, which has been defined by protests during the past few decades almost. And then when we decided for the movements, we created a pool of 10 potential interesting candidates for each individual movement. We did this in close collaboration, I think most importantly with the New York Times, but also with many other local journalists, local activists, NGOs as well. And we then tried to find the one person who is most representative for the individual movement, who is sort of coming from the backbone of the movement. And I mean, in between all of us, we had potential candidates who were almost like rock stars. They went to the front line with a huge risk, and they said sentences like "all policemen should die." And to be honest, these are usually, especially in Germany, the ones who are ending up getting featured for like the 30-second TV clip. But it's just not representative for the movement in general. And it was pretty clear that I'm not in a position to make that decision. Neither is our producer or our editor, but that this is a decision that has to be made on the ground with as many activists and journalists and NGOs as well. So yeah, and then we settled for these three impressive women.
Okay, one very brief question and then we're done. Just this lady here. Thank you.
Thank you. First, thank you for your work and beautifully shot. I really like also the editing of like how you just transition between the stories, not just one after the other, but also how they actually connected because we are linked all together. Following up to this question, is there a precise reason or is just by chance that you actually represented like young women? And actually for me is like very powerful as well. And I don't know if it's by chance was actually a decision of yours.
Yeah, very interesting question. Thank you. It was a coincidence, if you want to say so. So we had, we obviously decided for the protagonists one by one. So we had our protagonist, our Hong Kong protagonist confirmed, then our Ugandan protagonist, and then all of a sudden we were in Chile. And it was pretty clear to us that Rayen is the most obvious and the best choice and most suitable choice. And surely at that point, we did raise the question, okay, so we will have 3 female activists that will perhaps be some sort of statement, that will perhaps be some sort of, I don't know, could put us in a specific place. Nevertheless, though, that was the only decision, that was the right decision. But it wasn't planned, if you want to say so. And as I mentioned before, we had a pool of 10 potential candidates. These were pretty much 50-50 when it comes to the gender.
Well, thank you for those. Regrettably, we are out of time. It's been wonderful to be with you this evening. A great privilege to have such a wonderful panel, particularly 2 people from the movement who we know have made great and severe sacrifices in order to stand up for their freedom. But thank you very much indeed to the Frontline Club for having us, and a great privilege to be with you all this evening. Thanks.
Thank you.